Welcome to our coffee lecture, Two Ways of Publishing Conference Papers Open Access. My name is Andrea Moritz, and I am a member of the team e-publishing at ETH Library. Today, I would like to raise your awareness so that you can publish your conference papers free to read for others and increase the open access share of your publications. We are looking at two routes you may take to publish conference papers open access. First, your author's rights to republish your paper openly, free of charge in our institutional repository after its initial publication. And second, paid options for an immediate open access publication on the publisher's website. So why should we look closer at open access for conference papers anyway? To answer this question, let's start with a look at the numbers. Conference papers are the second most common type of publication by ETH members after journal articles. In the Swiss National Open Access Monitor, you can see that about 70%, this is the colored part, of all reported publications by ETH in 2023 are openly available. Books, parts of books, conference proceedings, and journal articles are reported to the monitor. At first glance, this sounds like great news. But if you take a closer look at the share of conference papers in these figures, you can see that the OA share for conference papers is much worse than average. Around 60%, this is the gray part, of conference papers from ETH members are not openly accessible and therefore less visible. As an author of such a paper, what steps can you take to improve this? Basically, there are two possibilities. First, you know your copyright and use it to republish your work openly in ETH's institutional repository research collection. And the second option is to pay the publisher a publication fee to publish your paper under a Creative Commons license so that it can be freely accessed on the publisher's website and reused by others. Which of these options you can take depends in part on the publisher of your paper. Looking at this graph with the frequency distribution for 172 different publishers of conference papers by ETH members in 2023, it becomes clear that making general recommendations for authors is really challenging. Most publishers release fewer than 10 conference papers by ETH members each year. Rather than delving into each publisher that has published ETH papers in the past, I will focus on the three most frequently publishers: IEEE, ICM, and Springer. If you have published a conference paper, Springer or IEEE, knowing your rights to republish your papers is key for a free of charge open access publication. Additionally, other smaller publishers also allow republishing your paper after their publication. Before we have a look on your author's rights guaranteed by a specific publisher, let's have a short deep dive into author's rights. When authors publish their work with a publishing house, they often need to transfer their copyright to these houses. This process usually involves granting the publisher the exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and sell one's work. However, authors may retain certain rights, such as the ability to reuse their work for specific purposes or republish it in an institutional repository. Understanding the terms of the copyright transfer agreement is crucial for authors to know their rights and limitations regarding their published work. Many publishing houses permit the free of charge publication of the so-called authors accepted manuscripts, or short AAMs, of published articles in the research collection. This republishing is also referred to as self-archiving. An AAM is the final author's manuscript accepted for publication after the peer review, and it contains all revisions made during the review and is equivalent to the published version in terms of the content. The AAM is mostly designed by the author and does not have a publisher's layout or logo. Some publishers only permit the publication of articles in repositories after a so-called embargo period. However, you can submit your paper to the research collection at any time. When uploading the file, just indicate the embargo end date and your paper will be automatically made available to external users on this day, while only the metadata will be visible immediately. Major publishers like IEEE have standard self-archiving policies that define what, when, and where you can self-archive. According to the IEEE self-archiving policy, you can share or post your accepted paper in the research collection. The only thing you need to consider is that IEEE must be accredited as the copyright holder with a specific statement following the text sample on my slide here. IEEE's embargo period is 0 months, so your paper can become immediately open access in our research collection. Springer has also a self-archiving policy for conference papers in place. Authors can share or post their accepted paper in an institutional repository like the research collection free of charge as well. When you contributed to an edited work, you are allowed to archive up to 1 chapter per conference proceeding, respecting Springer's embargo period of 12 months. As you have seen in the graph at the beginning, ETH authors publish their conference papers with a wide variety of publishers. If you publish your paper with a smaller publisher, you may find there is no general self-archiving policy mentioned on its website. The transfer of copyright, which you often need to sign when submitting a paper, defines which author's rights remain with you and which rights you must transfer to the publisher for publication. Here's my recommendation. Read this agreement thoroughly, check it for self-archiving restrictions. If the agreement forbids self-archiving, try to negotiate changes to transfer, for example, only non-exclusive publishing rights. And keep a copy of the signed agreement in a safe place for future reference. If you upload your work later, ensure you upload the allowed version of your work with the right embargo to the repository. And of course, if you are insecure about your rights, you can always contact the research collection team and we try to help you. Finally, let's look at the second OA option, which is to pay the publisher a publication fee, so-called book chapter processing charge, to publish your paper under an open Creative Commons license. With such a license, others can access your paper directly from the publisher's website and reuse its content, while often the rest of the conference proceeding is only accessible for subscribers. These paid-for OA options are offered by at least the larger publishers. But at present, there are no broad-based funding mechanisms for publication charges for book chapters or conference papers at ETH. From journals, you know maybe so-called read and publish agreements that take the library's existing expenditure on subscriptions for a publisher and redirect it to cover both reading and publishing in that publisher's journals. Such an agreement is in place with the Association of Computational Machinery. The special component of this agreement is that it covers not only journal articles, but also conference papers. The reason for this is ACM's commitment to transform its entire portfolio into fully open access publications until end of this year. This transformation involves a complete shift from subscription costs paid by readers to publication costs paid by authors. To benefit from this agreement and publish your papers free of charge open access, submit your paper as corresponding author to ACM, stating your ETH affiliation and ETH email address. Your paper should then become open access automatically. The only exception for this agreement are conference proceedings that ACM co-publishes with IEEE or SAGE. These are for now excluded. Last but not least, if you have published a conference paper in connection with an SNSF project, you may be able to benefit from the SNSF's open access funding for book chapters. This is because conference papers are considered book chapters if they are published as part of a peer-reviewed collection, or a peer-reviewed proceeding. You can apply for funding if the SNSF funded at least 50% of the research on which your publication is based, and at least one of the authors is a researcher who has received the respective grant or is a team member of the SNSF-funded project. And of course, the SNSF funding of the research must be mentioned in the acknowledgements section of the publication. Your funding applications for book chapter processing charges can be submitted via the MySNF online platform, even after the project has been completed. In case your conference paper will be published in a journal, then the SNSF's funding mechanism for peer-reviewed journal article is applicable. More information about this can be found on the website of the SNSF. This was our last coffee lecture for this term, but don't worry, we will be back in June. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's session and would appreciate your feedback in the survey my colleague will share in a second with you. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about my lecture, I'd be delighted to answer them now.